down to see us. Down to Cincinnati, down to see us. We'll have a lot of fun, you will agree. And we'll show you a thing or two, yes sirree, down at the 50 Club.
Fresh like vacuum-cooked canned peas are different three ways. Better three ways. You can hear the difference, you can see the difference, you can taste the difference. Now from Cincinnati, Ohio, it's the big Midwestern Hayride, brought to you by Crosley and Bendix, America's favorite family of quality home appliances, radio and television sets.
Do hereby proclaim Friday, April 23rd, 1965, as Paul Dixon Day in Cincinnati, Ohio.
And I want to talk a little bit about the fact that this is, for all intents and purposes, your last regular newscast after 37 years or so here at WLW.
This is what we're going to talk about for the next year?
This is what we're going to talk about, Peter.
Well, you don't think we're going to have any viewers left after you've announced that?
NBC Television.
2-1 pitch from Schaus into left center. There it is. Rose has eclipsed Cobb. That's number 4,192.
Sorry, we're closed.
Good evening and welcome to WLWT, 50 Years on 5. I'm Norma Rashid.
And I'm Charlie Lucan. Tonight, we invite you to travel back in time for a look at WLWT's rich history. It's a history filled with many television firsts and dozens of famous faces.
When we first signed on in 1948, there were barely 1,000 television sets in the entire tri-state area. Most of those sets have been purchased to watch experimental station W8XCT, which later became WLWT. Today, more than 2 million people can watch us any time of the day or night.
On February 9th of this year, WLWT entered a new era of broadcasting when we signed on our new digital channel, WLWT DT35. Much like when we first signed on in 1948, no one could watch our digital broadcast. But that will change later this year when digital television sets become available to the consumer.
We'll bring you up to speed on digital television later in the show, but first, the visionaries behind the birth of WLWT.
When 50 Years on 5 continues. Imagine a time when creative thought overflowed dreams, hopes, and ambitions. A time when making history was an everyday event and anything seemed possible. Imagine the beginning of television. It begins, like so many other adventures, with a man and a vision. Long ago, a young boy went to his father and described a wireless gadget, a radio. Very excited, the boy begged his father to get him one. Paul Crosley Jr. looked down at his son and said, "Sure," thinking it was no more than a toy. When Crosley learned of how expensive these radios were, he was shocked and set out to build the radio himself. Soon after his radio was complete, he tuned it to a radio signal from Pittsburgh. This intrigued Crosley, feeding his imagination with possibilities and many what-ifs. He then bought a 20-watt transmitter and started sending his own signal of recorded music over the air. What seemed to be just a hobby was growing into much more. Crosley's transmission was given the call letters 8XAA, and on March 22, 1922, became WLW, the first licensed radio station in Cincinnati, also giving birth to the Crosley Radio Corporation. WLW became a great success, reaching listeners all across the country, thus giving the name the nation's station. For several years, WLW transmitted with 500,000 watts of power, reaching people all over the world. In April 1937, the Crosley Radio Corporation began an effort of research, experimentation, and development completely devoted to try to making television a reality. They designed and built the equipment necessary to put a television signal over the air and applied for application for station construction. While waiting for approval, the 48th floor of the Carew Tower was leased out and later became the location for the first transmitter and studio in Cincinnati. The television station became known as W8XCT. Crosley's factories became increasingly busy. Therefore, he had to find another place for WLW. In 1942, Paul Crosley Jr. purchased the Elks Temple at 9th and Elm for $200,000. 2 years later, WLW moved into what is now known as Crosley Square. In 1945, the Crosley Radio Corporation became a subsidiary of the Aviation Corporation. That same year, the Aviation Corporation also purchased several manufacturing companies. By June of 1946, the war had ended, and W8XCT resumed its experiments. On June 6th, W8XCT sent out the first live pictures from the Carew Tower to Crosley Square. In 1947, the Aviation Corporation changed its name to the Avco Manufacturing Corporation. Crosley's company then became the Crosley Broadcasting Corporation, a wholly owned subsidiary. After many more experiments, the Crosley Broadcasting Corporation had learned much about the mystery of television. On July 31st, 1947, W8XCT started a regular schedule of 1 hour a week on air. By the end of the year, W8XCT was on the air an average of 20 hours a week. Now that may not seem like a lot, but at the time there was less than 100 television sets in the entire city of Cincinnati.
When we started, there were very, very few television sets out there.
Just in the bars.
But the bars and in front of every electronics store, people would stand out on the sidewalks in the hundreds sometimes. If it was a boxing match or a popular show, and the proprietor would put a television set. In those days, the biggest set was probably about 10 inches, and you stood there and watched in fascination just to see that. In a very short time, of course, that changed.
On February 2nd, 1948, for a brief night, W8XCT became a commercial television station, WLWT, for the first sponsored television program in Cincinnati. Televised was an early session of the Golden Glove boxing tournament. The fight was sponsored by Wiedemann's Beer, making Wiedemann's the first television sponsor in Cincinnati. The next morning, WLWT became W8XCT once again. On February 9th, 1948, W8XCT officially became WLWT Channel 4. On this date, the first department store-sponsored program in Ohio was Luncheon at the Sinton. The second sponsored show that day was the Kitchen Club.
But when we started, nobody knew anything about television. The clients and the people from the ad agency said, look, we don't know what's going on. Go out and ad-lib. So we ad-libbed commercials. Or 6 months later, they're all experts.
On February 13th, 1948, the first Midwestern Hayride aired right here on WLWT. Little did producers know what a spectacular event this would be.
It was a fascinating time, a wonderful time to be in it. It permitted us to try anything we wanted to see if it would work on camera.
Well, almost.
Within reason. The rest of us left for the young people today to try. But they allowed us to try new ideas all the time to see how things were working. Things are pretty strict and regulated today. You know, you take somebody's shots, one call, the guy sits on you. In those days, anything went. And it was really, really delightful to be able to explore this new medium of television.
On February 15th, 1948, WLWT opened the Mount Olympus studio.
At the start, nobody knew exactly what television was going to be like.
The original studio on the hill is so big. Why is it so tall? Only because the only guy that had any other experience was Chester Herman, who worked in the St. Louis Opera House. Yeah. And they all visualized TV was going to be a stage. Everybody looked at it that way.
With a proscenium arch. So that
stuff too. Until the very first show hit the air and you realized that was dumb as all hell.
Nobody knew what it was
because you realized
going to be.
You ain't going to show the audience what you don't want them to see.
In April 1948, WLWT signed the first NBC affiliate contract in the country, airing kinescope recordings of popular shows like Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. The recordings were obtained by pointing a kinescope film camera at a small television while it was picking up a signal of the shows being done live. When the recordings were complete, they were flown from New York City to Cincinnati. In 1949, a coaxial cable running from New York City to Cincinnati was finally connected. With the cable in place, Cincinnatians could watch their favorite network programs being done live with a cleaner and clearer picture. In addition to the network service, WLWT programmed approximately 40 hours of live studio performances each week. Coming up next, the 50s arrive here at WLWT as 50 Years on 5 continues.
The 1950s brought many exciting advances and opportunities to WLWT in the field of broadcasting. As we thumb through the pages of WLWT's historical scrapbook, we encounter several landmark events and the unforgettable people associated with them. In February of 1950, WLWT originated Cincinnati's first network television feed as Kukla, Fran, and Ollie traveled to Cincinnati to participate in the largest single telecast in local TV history. WLWT was especially proud of this event because it accompanied the celebration of their second anniversary of commercial operations. 6 months later, WLWT introduced Cincinnati to the rest of the country by establishing the city's first regular feed to a TV network. The programs were Cincinnati on Sunset and Dude Ranch Holiday. When November of 1950 arrived, all eyes of the nation focused on the Ohio senatorial race. WLWT swung into action, establishing key coverage points in Cincinnati and Columbus, close to and sometimes within the headquarters of the candidates. During the evening, feeds were made to the NBC network, while local viewers were furnished with tabulated reviews and interviews of prominent political analysts. The following summer found Cincinnati right in the middle of the national TV scene as WLWT originated Midwestern Hayride for the NBC TV network as a summer replacement. The popular country western variety show included a live studio audience, a cast of regulars, special guests, and a regular show host. But the secret to Midwestern Hayride's success and longtime audience loyalty can probably be chalked up to the number of talented performing groups and individuals who made up the regular cast. The show's variety format included instrumental music by the Lucky Pennies, starring Penny West, comedies sung by Zeke and Billy, ballads and popular tunes sung by WLWT's outstanding vocalist Bonnie Lou. There were also novelty numbers performed by the Sweethearts of the Hayride, favorites Helen and Billy Scott, Bobby Bobo with his guitar and rich singing voice, the Hometowners clowning and singing in unique style, and last but not least, exciting heel-tapping colorful folk and square dances by the famous Midwesterners. So great was the show's popularity in the fall of 1955 that it was given a regular half-hour slot Wednesday nights on NBC. Critics labeled it a coast-to-coast joyride which bubbles along with the gaiety and sparkle of a country festival. During the summer of 1957, ABC carried the weekly telecast. When placed in syndication, the show was seen in as many as 44 cities. In 1952, WLWT acquired a new high-gain antenna, which gave them a power equivalent of 50,000 watts to climax 11 years of television equipment development. For WLWT, this was only a sign of better things to come.
The first color transmission that we had here was a network transmission of the Rose Bowl game, January 1, 1954. We had the first color set in the city was set up in this very studio. We had a lot of guests in on a Sunday afternoon to watch the Rose Bowl parade. And the Rose Bowl parade was our first color television show broadcast on Channel 5 in Cincinnati.
Crosley Broadcasting established the first weather station designed expressly for a radio TV operation in 1954. It was one of the finest, best-equipped weather stations in the country. The following year, WLWT installed a radar weather unit. This enabled the station's full-time staff of 3 meteorologists to see the weather many hours before it arrived in the viewing area.
Here we are in Cincinnati with a current temperature of 71 degrees.
One of the most popular personalities on the local scene, Paul Dixon, came to WLWT in 1955. The long-running Paul Dixon Show featured the Bruce Brownfield Band, Bonnie Lou, and Colleen Sharp. With a focus on the housewife, this hour-and-a-half show was filled with the light-hearted banter of Paul and Bonnie, interesting interviews with studio visitors, amusing contests, bright vocals by Bonnie, and melodious music by the Bel Airs.
This has got to be the youngest, most beautiful group of women we've ever had on this television show.
Oh, I'll never be the same.
Mercy, what's a mother to do?
You don't know how long I've been waiting for this.
Look, lady, you run your railroad and I'll run mine.
Laugh follows laugh, and the entertainment is never ending as Paul and Bonnie keep things moving at a brisk pace.
I can recall Paul Dixon when he did his morning show from 9 to 10:30 a.m. I'd go up and see him after the show, and he would come off the air drenched in sweat, where he had just really worked terribly hard with that audience for an hour and a half straight. And he was not even reasonable to talk to until he'd had a shower and a cup of coffee.
Early in 1957, WLWT completed its Communications Exchange Facility, or COMEX, in the DeCourcy building across Elm Street from Crosley Square. This storefront studio housed the station's complete news and weather staff and equipment. The year-old building's 2,100 square feet of broadcasting space constituted a broadcasting dream come true. COMEX was staffed by 3 meteorologists, a news editor-director, 3 photographers, and the Dean of Midwestern Newscasters, Peter Grant. Running the entire length of this ultra-modern building's street level was a glare-free panoramic glass window, turning the mammoth studio into a fascinating public showcase. Considering all of the amazing advances experienced by WLWT during the 50s, perhaps the most important of all was the birth of locally originated color programs. On July 1, 1957, Ruth Lyons took the black and white cameras on her 50/50 Club program outside the Crosley studios for a look at the just-arrived WLW Television Color mobile unit. That day's audience was treated to a close inspection of the 32-foot-long, 27,000-pound mobile bus, which housed the 3 RCA TK41 color cameras. This was the first such mobile color unit purchased by an independent station. At 12 noon on August 9, 1957, WLWT became the first independent telecaster to originate live color programs with the color cast of the 50/50 Club. On the following day, Midwestern Hayride was color cast. Programs such as The Paul Dixon Show, Star Maker Review, and Outdoor Guide quickly followed suit. Because of the overall total of color hours available to viewers, Cincinnati, courtesy of WLWT, became known as Color Town, USA. With the advances in technology, the door was thrown wide open to live color broadcasting. In May 1959, WLWT televised the first Cincinnati Reds baseball game in color. Later that same year, the first indoor sports event, the Cincinnati Royals pro basketball game, was shot in color. The 1950s was a decade of technological advances. Many people were skeptical.
People didn't know what television was. They were bowled over with the new medium, and everybody thought, including the advertisers, including some of the people at P&G, including everybody, they thought that's another little toy down there at 9th and Elm that Powell Crosley is playing with.
Thank goodness for the toy makers. What followed? A time of uncertainty and free thinking where television took center stage. Travel back with us to the 60s coming up.
There were a lot of very talented people here to make this thing work. A lot of us felt that it was going to be very difficult to make this economically viable because the extreme costs of the cameras, the equipment, the manpower, so different from radio as what we were used to. But Jimmy Schaus was a very creative guy, and Bob Dunville and John Murphy came in to head up the television group, and they just pushed and pushed and pushed until this thing became economically viable, until we got sales in enough that we could support operating this thing. And it was a tough go.
Welcome back. The 1960s was a decade of change and growing technology in every industry, especially television. Live local television was all the rage in Cincinnati, and WLWT fed the hungry viewers with great programming like the 50-50 Club, the Bob Braun Show, the Paul Dixon Show, local sporting events, and much more. At this point, almost everybody in Cincinnati owned a television set.
But this station single-handedly sold an incredible number of color television sets. They promoted the devil out of it, where they call it the Color Town USA. I mean, this station was just, man, they were gigantic.
On May 16, 1960, WLWT televised the first night Major League Baseball game in color from Crosley Field. The 3 color cameras used were equipped with special low-light tubes, developed by General Electric. Now, the tubes were originally designed for military use, but were adapted for television by engineers from General Electric and the Crosley Broadcasting Corporation. GE then received the 1960 Emmy Award for Outstanding Engineering for Technical Achievement in the field of television. In turn, General Electric honored WLWT with a special gold plaque. As this infant industry grew, so did its technology. In the beginning, everything had to be made from scratch. As time went on, better ways of doing things were adapted, and huge, sophisticated machinery started to shrink and become even more sophisticated. In April 1966, Midwestern Hayride began syndication through ABC Films. The first syndicated show had the same format as the series, with lots of live dancing, singing, and guests. The many live shows that were being done had literally turned the WLWT studio into a revolving door of sets and props, constantly being torn down and put back up. Another show to be added to the circus was the Bob Braun Show.
Gentlemen, would you welcome, please, one of the great pitchers in the National League, Mr. Jack Billingham.
On January 23, 1967, the first episode of the Bob Braun Show went on the air at 4 p.m. The show featured Bob, Nick Clooney, and the Frankie Brown Band. Bob was to do this show in addition to his appearances on the 50-50 Club. Now, 2 days after the Bob Braun Show went on the air, Ruth Lyons did her last show and announced her retirement. The next decade in television made much more possible. Still ahead on 50 Years on 5, see how new technology and experimentation paved the way for TV in the 70s.
Television saw a lot of changes in the 1970s with new technology. The impossible became possible. Reporters could tell their stories live from the scene, and the change from film to video cameras helped get pictures to you much faster. But as you'll see, even before the new technology, the news staff of WLWT could still bring the events of the day into people's homes, even if it meant some improvising.
You also had facsimile pictures. Not a great deal different than the faxes a lot of people have in their homes today. They were black and white. Everything else on the station was color, but the news was still black and white. But the night we finally went to color, we had a new color film processor, and we had color cameras in place, and everything was set to go. The one thing we hadn't counted on was the fact that these facsimile pictures were all black and white. And I've taken a great ribbing for this ever since, but I had the entire staff, including Peter Grant, with crayons, trying to add a little color to some of those fax pictures. So there was a little selective journalism going on. Somebody would be yelling, what color do you think his suit ought to be? Or how about his shirt? Let's make it yellow.
I can recall back in the early days on television when we did reports on election eve, where all the guys out of the sales department and out of the program department and every place in the building, they would be the remote anchors, the remote announcers, telling what was happening down at town hall when they were counting the votes, who was being elected.
Something that everybody takes for granted today, we have a crawl device that goes across the bottom of the screen. Everybody's familiar with that every time there's any kind of a weather or a bulletin or anything that happens. We didn't have one of those. So we invented one of our own. We typed on a sheet of white paper and got a piece of masonite, cut a groove in a board, and sort of slid the copy through in front of the camera lens, and it depended upon the steadiness of the guy's hand pushing it through or whether the butter we had put on it to make it skid easier was sticking, and it would go sometimes like this, but we managed to got our bulletins out and began to, little by little, look a little bit more professional.
Hello, I'm Steve Handelsman, the national correspondent for the NBC-owned stations around the country and former WLWT reporter from 1975 to 1978. Since no one really knows how long the natural gas crisis will last, people here at this Kroger have no idea when they'll be able to turn up their thermostats. When WLWT news director Bob McCall and I spoke, I was desperate for a job, and I said, Bob, I'll come there. And he said, we don't have anything. And then he called me back and he said, if you'll work as a full-time reporter here in Cincinnati for $230 a week, no overtime, you've got the job. I said, okay, and I came to Cincinnati. I'd never been to Cincinnati before.
It was a high energy, committed, dedicated group of people working in the newsroom, and the leadership was very strong. And, you know, we did a lot of things that we were proud of.
Good evening. I'm Tom Atkins, and this is the news. We'll have details of all today's news coming up.
I came out here in 1972 to WLW Radio. Of course, at the time, we worked out of the same newsroom. Avco owned both radio and television. And we were right across the street where Legal Aid is now. And of course, a big glass window, people walking by could look right into the newsroom.
The city is short of manpower and money, and the road patch-up work will take a long time to complete, if ever. Tom Craig, TV5 Action News.
I recall that when we decided to go to all tape, it seemed like a risky thing to me for some reason, that we were giving up film, you know, and going to tape. I thought, oh my God, is this going to work, you know?
One of the things I'm most proud of in my only 3-year career at WLWT is the fact that I'm the first reporter at Channel 5 to ever do a live shot. So much changed when I was there. When I got there, the place was 100% film. Then we went to 3/4-inch tape, and then we finally got a live truck. And you know what I did the first live shot on? It was on the fact that Channel 5 had a truck. So we put the dish that sends the signal aimed back at the tower, so we could send our live picture in, but we pointed the camera like this at the truck. And I stood in front of the truck and reported live on the new WLWT action camera. It was great.
You get the adrenaline going, and all of a sudden you go an extended period of time without taking a deep breath, so to speak, and you really feel alive while you're involved in those things. So that was an opportunity that newscasting gave to me that I don't know where I've gotten somewhere else except maybe in military. I got through 11 years without anybody knowing what I thought about anything based on what they saw on television. And I'm very proud of that.
When I got to WLWT in 1975, no question who was the best reporter in that shop. It was Tom Craig. He covered so many trials in Cincinnati that we called him Tommy Trials. Best reporter in Cincinnati, I thought, in 1975. I'm sure in 1985, after I'd left, in 1995, and I bet he'll still be the best reporter in Cincinnati in the year 2005. We called him Tommy Trials because he covered so many trials. When you see him in Cincinnati, you call him Tommy Trials. See what he says.
Thank you, Steve Handelsman from the NBC Bureau in Washington. And to give you an update, former anchor Tom Atkins is now retired from broadcasting, and Tom Craig is still Tommy Trials. Well, before we say goodbye to the 70s, here's a collection of WLWT's most famous faces. It's the Avco Hour of Stars performing in front of a capacity crowd at the Ohio State Fair.
The Ohio State Fair was the poorest fair in the United States. It ranked 50 in all the states. And Jim Rhodes called me one day and we went down to see him and he said, I want to make the Ohio State Fair the #1 state fair in the United States. So we sat down and we planned for 3 or 4 months and we went to the Ohio State Fair and we originated 4 or 5 programs, some of our regular shows like Bob Braun and Midwestern Hayride and Paul Dixon. In 1 year, we jumped to the #1 attended Ohio State Fair in the United States.
To the Avco Hour of Stars.
Tonight,
right here on our show, you're going to see the people you see every day on WLW television in Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, and Indianapolis, and here on WLW radio. With our orchestra, the beautiful ABCO Orchestra, directed by Cliff Lash, ladies and gentlemen. And now, are you ready for this?
I believe in music. I believe in love. Yes, I do.
Yes, he went away last summer, a couple of months ago. After all our time together, it was hard to see her go.
You know, I just realized something. You're like the rest of us. You're a ham. Oh, I love it. This ought to happen to everybody.
I love you, baby. I love you. I love you.
You only wanted someone to play, oh yeah. All I wanted was love to say, love to say.
We don't have tomorrow, but we had yesterday.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present to you Sonny and Two Shares.
Oh, you're nobody till somebody loves you.
Yes, sir!
If you scream, you can't hear me. Start from the beginning.
If there's any kindness I can show, let me show it now, for I'll never see this day again.
There is a long tradition of unique personalities who have appeared on WLWT over the last 50 years. Two in particular, Phil Donahue and Jerry Springer, have had an impact not only here in Cincinnati, but across the nation, even around the world. Phil Donahue began his talk show career with AVCO Broadcasting in the late 1960s, under the guidance of producer Don Dahlman.
I met Phil in Dayton, Ohio, when I first went up there, and he was really so good and so strong. His radio show that he had on the air at the same time Ruth Lyons was on was causing us some rating problems. So one of the things to do with a guy who's causing you problems is hire him. So I managed to hire Phil to do the show that you know as the Donahue Show.
Listen, why don't you shut up and let me talk, you know? Maybe the punchline will contain your answer, you know? So don't be so constipated. I'm disappointed that you're so... I'm disappointed in you.
It was an experience, an interesting experience. The only time I ever sat in the booth with my finger on the button ready to take the show off the air. I didn't, because Phil got through all the problems and we went on.
In the early days, by the way, when Donahue was local here, we sent him to the Ohio State Penitentiary, and he did a week out of the Ohio State Penitentiary, which was just astonishing. He brought in Billy Graham as his spokesman for one day. He brought in the top jazz singer at that time to entertain these prisoners, and he actually did his show out of the prison auditorium or out of cells. It was a remarkable 5 days of shows.
Phil Donahue had a successful show that lasted more than 25 years, and his impact went beyond just entertainment.
I have a psychiatrist friend, a woman psychiatrist friend, who tells me that she thinks he was the most important thing that happened to women in that period, from 1967, 8, 9 on, until he retired. He was the most important thing of bringing knowledge to women.
There's a new kid on our talk show block. His name is Jerry Springer.
The Jerry Springer Show debuted on WLWT September 30th, 1991. But 20 years earlier, Jerry was known as Councilman Springer. Then, in 1977, at the age of 33, he was elected mayor of Cincinnati. This is how Jerry saw his future then.
I grew up a bit. I mean, you know, everybody matures. That's a function of living. And I feel now that there's been acceptance, you know, fairly widespread acceptance of me as a person. Where do I go? I love what I'm doing. I mean, I love being in politics. And that's the only thing I'm sure of, that I want to stay in that. I mean, I don't chart out my life saying in 1980 I'll be here, in 1984. I mean, I learned that you don't do that. So all I can say is that I'm going to stay active in politics and now concentrate on hopefully being a very good mayor.
Springer began his television broadcasting career at WLWT in 1982 as a political reporter and commentator. After learning to report, he was in the anchor chair.
My early days, frankly, I stunk. I was awful. You know, I had Norma around, and she knew how to, or as I said, Norma, you know, she knew how to be an anchor. I didn't, and so it was pretty difficult to watch in the beginning, to be honest. You know, I would freeze in front of the camera, and, you know, I was fine just talking off the cuff, but if I had to read a script, you know, it was pretty brutal.
Despite his rough times, WLWT became the #1 news program in Cincinnati. Then, the show that made Springer a household name. It started in 1991.
At some level, they had made the decision that they were going to have another talk show, and I would be a good host. That was their decision. I'd never thought about it. It seemed like a fun thing to do. I got pretty excited about it. And look what's happened now. So, you know, it turned out to be the best decision I ever made in my life. In the beginning, it was a serious talk show because I was doing the news. I couldn't very well be dancing with the Chippendales in the afternoon if I was going to be doing serious news at night. But then once I gave up the news and could devote full time to the show, then the show took on the craziness that it is now. Now it's a circus, and it's meant to be. You know, our show is about outrageousness. It's not meant to be serious. It's meant to be silly and funny and compelling at times, but just totally off the wall. And so it's a totally different show now. I wouldn't even call it a talk show. Now it's just pure entertainment.
Entertainment was only one of the goals of the Young People's Specials. These programs that began in 1972 were created to educate young viewers as they grew through their teens and into adulthood. Two of the creators talked about the shows that ran for 15 years and became the longest-running anthology ever on television.
In the early 70s, or the mid-70s, the FCC began to really put the pressure on television for young people's programming. And AVCO, Walter Bartlett and John Murphy, decided that they wanted to do something and to get into that market, and it's a market that they hadn't been in, had not been doing anything in. So we developed a series called the Young People's Specials. We ended up producing about 70 of them over a 10, 12-year period.
We did, as part of the Young People's Specials, The Last Prom. I had made it first in 1963, remade it again in 1968, and then as a part of the Young People's Specials, we remade it again in the 1980s. To update the costumes and the cars. And that was shown in driver's education classes all over the country. Cincinnati is a great place to make film. You've got every kind of background in the world here, from something that looks like old New York to something that looks like Europe, or just a huge variety of backgrounds. Even though it was local, it had enough class or enough quality to it that it could be aired and syndicated nationally and even internationally.
It was so great because we were doing some things that I think that most of us believed in. I mean, we thought we were doing something that was good for television, good for children, and so in believing that kind of thing, it just makes it worthwhile. It wasn't something we were out to do just to make money. It was something that we were out to try to do something that was good and something that was relevant and something that really meant something.
When we come back, a look at WLWT in the 90s, including the events of this decade that have drawn our community together.
I just want to wish the people at WLWT a happy 50th anniversary. One of the proudest moments in my life was that I was able to be a part of that for 10 of the 50 years. And it's hard to think about Cincinnati without thinking about Channel 5. So happy anniversary. Good luck to all of you, and continue your great record in serving the community.
Local news at WLWT has grown over the past 50 years. What started as a 15-minute newscast has expanded. Today, News 5 brings viewers in Greater Cincinnati on the tri-state events as they happen. And when an event brings the community together, WLWT News 5 makes you a part of the story. Here's a look at some of those moments. Tall Stacks, America's celebration of the steamboating era, has become a Cincinnati tradition. It began in 1988 with 5 days of food, music, and the greatest assembly of steamboats in modern times.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, our third Rumble in the Jungle.
Beginning last season, Rumble in the Jungle brought fans up close with their favorite bingos with live shows from around the tri-state. It goes beyond facts and figures and into the minds of the people who play the game.
This is the 79th annual opening day parade here in Cincinnati. It is a rite of spring. It is a rite of tradition.
The Cincinnati Reds have long been an important part of WLWT. This year, we took you to all the events surrounding opening day, including the ceremonial first pitch thrown out by NBC's Linda Vester, a Cincinnati native.
I never got to skip school and come out for opening day, so now I finally get to play hooky, come out for opening day, and not just sit in the seats, but get out there on the mound and throw a pitch, so I'm pretty excited.
Those are just some of the events on WLWT that celebrate Cincinnati. Those planned festivities play a big role in our community, but there are also times of unexpected tragedy. These are the moments that bring our community together to help relieve the victims and comfort the loved ones. In 1997, heavy rains and snow caused the river to flood and several communities were devastated. The flood of '97 was a tragedy, and WLWT was there to help in the relief effort.
This has been one of those moments of tragedy, and you know, in a moment of tragedy, when our lives seem so intertwined, that's a time when people turn to each other, and I think we witnessed that firsthand over the past few weeks. Our Storm Team 5 emergency support team has witnessed this. When confronted with the problem, the solution seemed pretty obvious. We just rolled up our sleeves and helped. It didn't involve a lot of red tape or fancy rules and regulations. We just pitched in and did the right thing. 53 truckloads of supplies were collected, and what we figured out, that's about 500 tons worth of all types of supplies, along with thousands and thousands of dollars. Now, the Storm Team 5 emergency support team effort responded to the immediate need as the rising floodwaters caused problems.
Cincinnati was in mourning for the loss of 2 of its officers, Daniel Pope and Ronald Jeter. Their deaths will always be a painful reminder of the risk police take every day in protecting our lives.
Making his way up the steps, leading the casket, the American flag draped on the coffin.
In the face of hatred, crowning me with love beyond my part to hold.
We'd also like to acknowledge 2 other officers for their public service. Officer Mike Parton was killed during a foot chase on the Brent Spence Bridge. Officer Katie Conway survived a near-fatal shooting during her routine patrol. Coming up, WLWT celebrates 50 years of affiliation with the #1 broadcast network in the country, NBC.
As you've seen so far, WLWT and Channel 5 have a unique history, and so does the network we're so closely affiliated with, NBC. Channel 5 and NBC team up to bring the greater Cincinnati area the best programming, sporting events, and news coverage. Our relationship with NBC helps us bring the world right into your living room. NBC, like WLWT, has a rich history. The National Broadcasting Company went on the air for the first time in 1926 as the first permanent radio network. In 1931, NBC began experimenting with TV broadcasts. But it wasn't until 1939 that the network demonstrated television at the New York World's Fair, beginning regular New York TV service. 12 years later, NBC inaugurated its first regular coast-to-coast network service. And it's on NBC the world has seen some of the biggest and most important events in history.
On December 6, 1957, the United States tried to launch its first satellite. The flight lasted 2 seconds, reached an apogee of 6 feet.
NBC News brought Americans the beginning of the space race in the late 50s as the U.S. tried to get a spacecraft off the ground. We saw John Glenn orbit the Earth in 1962 and Neil Armstrong walk on the moon 7 years later.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Network television coverage also changed politics forever. The televised debate between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy in 1960 changed that momentum of the race, as Kennedy's youthful good looks and charisma swayed public opinion.
To convert our good words into good deeds, in a new alliance for progress, to assist free men.
Politicians and campaign managers have since learned that public opinion can be swayed by good or bad appearances on television. NBC also helped the nation mourn the loss of some of our most beloved heroes.
Mrs. Kennedy watches. She and Caroline, and with help John Jr., have written farewell letters which have been placed in the coffin.
Martin Luther King Jr. was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. Shot in the face as he stood alone on the balcony of his hotel room. He died in a hospital an hour later.
Challenger, go at throttle up. Challenger, go at throttle up.
Obviously a major malfunction.
And NBC's role over the years has also been one of unity, working to show a united nation and all the good things we can share. NBC was on the cutting edge when it came to morning programming. The premiere of the Today Show hit the air on January 14, 1952, as the first early morning network news program. It began as a 2-hour program from 7 to 9 in the morning and continues to dominate that time period today.
Today, January 14, 1952.
The Today Show hit the air with the most modern technology of the day. Communicator Dave Garroway, as anchors were called then, gave the top headlines and pictures of the day with the help of a picture board. The show was set up to give viewers all the information they need for the day ahead.
We call this room our communications center. From it, we'll put you in touch with the whole world, and not only with news, which we'll cover as no program ever has been able to cover before, because they didn't have this many tools, but we'll give you lots of music.
Participated in that memorial service last night. He says at a time like this, even religious leaders have been turning to each other for support and help. We'll get the latest from Jonesboro in the first half hour.
There have been some big changes over the years. Just take a look at the size of the microphone Dave Garroway had to wear. Compare it to the almost weightless microphones that Matt and Katie wear today. The Today Show has been a springboard for many network anchors to move on to bigger, better things. Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs anchored the program in the early 70s. And Jane Pauley and Tom Brokaw were the Today Show team until 1981. NBC's Today Show is currently rated as the nation's #1 morning news program. While NBC has led the pack in morning news programming, it has also set the pace for late-night TV. The first Tonight Show premiered in 1954, and since then, late-night viewers have laughed themselves to sleep with some of Hollywood's biggest stars.
The National Broadcasting Company presents Tonight, starring Steve Allen, with Pat Marshall, Andy Williams, Kitch Henderson, Gene Rayburn, and tonight's special guests, Jose Ferrer, Zsa Zsa Gabor, and world-famous ping-pong champion Sander Glenn, and Pauline Beth. Now here he is, the star of tonight, Steve Allen. Howdy.
That's right. As Gene Rayburn just announced, our guests tonight are Zsa Zsa Gabor and Jose Ferrer. Jose has already been on the show.
Steve Allen was the original host of TV's first late-night talk show, The Tonight Show. It premiered in 1954. He set the stage for a late-night show format that's worked for decades. In 1957, Jack Paar took over the lead job hosting famous guests like Robert Kennedy.
Let's give him a real welcome now. Not political, just a fine young American, Robert Kennedy. Would you read this to prove that you're a real Kennedy? I left my apartment and parked the car and went into the bar in Boston. Oh, you didn't do it the way. You guys can turn it on around.
Johnny Carson followed Jack Paar and for 30 years was the undisputed king of late-night TV. He became known for his opening monologue and his famous golf swing to kick off the show.
So stay where you are. We'll be right back.
His decision to leave the show in 1992 put comedian Jay Leno in the host chair.
Welcome to The Tonight Show. Nice to have you here.
And started a late-night war for the 11:30 slot. David Letterman, whose show aired after The Tonight Show, fought for that slot and lost, leading him to another network. That's when Conan O'Brien went on the air, followed by Later, originally hosted by Greg Kinnear.
NBC is already planning some blockbuster programming into the next century. NBC will be the place to turn for Olympic coverage well into the 21st century. NBC will carry the games in the year 2000 from Sydney, Australia. NBC will also carry the games in 2002 from Salt Lake City, Utah, and in 2004, 2006, and 2008 from sites that have not yet been selected. The NBC network today is very strong with the leading programming in the country, but it costs money, a lot of money, to make TV happen. Advertising rates have hit an all-time high for the top programming. NBC asked for $2 million a 30-second spot during the final episode of Seinfeld. That shattered the current record of $1.3 million an ad, set during this year's Super Bowl. Coming up, the legacy of a woman who set a very high standard for daytime TV, Ruth Lyons. But first, here's a look at some of NBC's most successful shows over 50 years. We'll be right back.
Every day when the clock strikes 12 o'clock.
That time of fun begins, so throw away your every dog and care. All the famous music, all we want is.
This theme became a familiar sound to people in the tri-state at 12 noon on weekdays, but Ruth Lyons wasn't always on WLWT.
I have heard from Mary Wood and other people that the manager of WLW was very impressed with her show. So he offered her $25 a week more than she was making at KRC. And Mr. Taft didn't come up with the $25 a week more, so she came over here and got very rich on $25 a week.
WKRC's loss was our gain. Ruth Lyons began her show, The 50 Club, on WLW Radio on February 5th, 1946. The radio show became so successful that it moved to television 2 years later and was simulcast on WLW radio and WLWT television. It became known as the 50-50 Club. Each day, 100 guests were invited to join Ruth for lunch at Crosley Square and stay for the production of the show, in which they were often a part. Ruth knew how to work the audience and had her own ideas about how the show would culminate.
What format? Ruth was the format. You never had an idea in the world what she was going to say or do, and when it came time for the program and the theme song would come on, I think then she made up her mind how she'd play that particular audience in there that day the way she did, and it was ingenious.
One thing was for sure, Ruth Lyons surrounded herself with talented people to enhance her show. She had co-hosts such as Willie Thaw, Bob Braun, and Peter Grant. The live music was always top-notch. Cliff Lash, Ruth's band leader, remembers.
One day, she said, "Clifford, get me a band, put together a good band." So I did. I had my pick of all the musicians in town, and I was quite proud of that.
Even the singers were hand-picked.
The vocalists are all good. She made a point of getting the best, and she did, with Marianne and Ruby and Bonnie Lou.
Ruth Lyons was a talented pianist, organist, and songwriter.
She would write little things at red lights and come in to the studio for the show that day and say, "Clifford, I just wrote this, play it."
You play it.
And she, and she would kind of start singing a little bit, and Clifford would just start playing it. It was amazing. They were tuned. I mean, really, they were a great pair.
The 50-50 Club would not be complete without a daily weather forecast, which was often done by Tony Sands.
Tony was a good weatherman, and he was part of the show. He did a lot of comedy along with the weather.
And the most trusted weatherman in Cincinnati. Everybody watched Channel 5's weather with Tony Sands.
And Ruth said, "Well, I'd like to do the weather a little differently, something more visual." So I said, "Yes, ma'am, we'll try." So we prepared a satellite board with a sleigh my son had, and put the topography on it, put it in front of a scrim, which is like a screen, and to indicate the change of time, we put on clouds and angel hair, and this was in 1958.
Ruth also had a way of making everyone in the studio a part of the show, even the children.
Well, she just wrote this children's marching song. 1, 2, 3, better not have me sing.
During the time that Miss Lyons was on the air, there were no real commercial breaks, so Ruth also made advertisements a part of the show.
Now, there is an old one that I think they made up. Was that Tempty Pretzel thing?
I think so, yeah.
That they kind of made that up on the air.
Start again.
A T-E-M-T-E-E, how good can a pretzel be?
Ruth Lyons continued her show until January 27, 1967. Mickey Fisher recalls that morning.
She called on the phone and said, "Mickey, do you have your pad and pencil ready?" And I said, "Yeah." And she says, "I've got to dictate something to you." She says, "I'm not going to come back." And I said, "What?" I said, "You're not coming back." She says, "I can't." And she started kind of crying a little bit.
For each and every one of you. And I hope that you will never forget, as it says in the second book of Timothy, "I have fought a good fight, I have run my course, I have kept the faith." Signed, Ruth.
I still have the copy of it, the carbon copy that I actually typed that day, where she acknowledges everybody and thanks the audience for all the years. And Walter Bartlett came on the show that day and read it, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house.
While the show still had very high ratings and there was still a demand for that type of show, it was time to find a replacement for Ruth.
When Miss L left the show, somebody had to take over, and Bob was logical.
They asked me about taking over Ruth Lyons' show because she was not coming back. She came back for about 3 days. And I said, to be honest with you, she's so wonderful. I think so highly of her that I don't think anybody could follow him.
But after some thought and some prodding from his friends, Bob decided to take over the 50/50 Club and make it his own show.
And he had a very tough task when Ruth left the show. I mean, sometimes people just seem irreplaceable, and sometimes someone just as good can come along and get that job, and not everybody can make a success out of it. But the fact that Bob got the job and did that show for 17 years is amazing, and it shows his power and his talent.
Part of Bob Braun's success stemmed from the woman he worked with for so many years.
Bob Braun learned from Ruth Lyons an art that too few people in the business understand, and that's to be able to have a product in your hand, know enough about it without having any copy, to explain what the product benefits are and the reasons why somebody ought to have it, and do it all in 1 minute.
Bob had a clock in his head, still does, and he was just brilliant at the commercials. Plus the fact that he is a great salesman, too, on top of all of that. I mean, it's not just that I can memorize all the facts about Jell-O. I mean, Bob could really sell that product. I don't care what it was.
Others attributed Bob Braun's success to his personality and ability to work the cameras and audience on live television.
I think probably the most exciting part was the fact that it was live. What you saw was what you got, and the people relished that. They absolutely loved that.
In fact, live television gave Bob the forum to play pranks on the other members of the show.
It was in the early 70s. I used to play my 12-string Martin guitar, nice guitar, and it was being repaired once, and I had gotten from a friend at the Martin factory a custom-built Martin 12-string that belonged to this guy. It's worth thousands and thousands of dollars now. But I used to put my guitar right behind the couch where we would all sit. And one day after a commercial, Bob got up and walked around his seat. Now, I was sitting probably in the second position on the couch. And he got up and walked around his seat, and I thought to myself, as I just sort of sat there looking at the audience, I hope he doesn't step on my guitar. Why is he going back there? All of a sudden, I heard this huge wooden crunch, and I jumped up and turned around, and he had put a double bushel basket and stepped into that. Scared the daylights out of me. He had me for lunch.
Bob liked a good joke, and he was also very close to the members of his cast.
We were like a family. And we cared if one of our family members was sick or had problems. They always had someplace they could go. And we tried always to be there for them because they were there for me. But I was thinking before coming down to the studio that that's an era that'll never return.
Bob even became good friends with some of his favorite guests.
Well, the absolute favorite guest I had was Bob Hope. And having met him when I was with Ruth, he became very friendly and nice, he and his wife Dolores. And whenever he got within 500 miles of Cincinnati, he'd fly in and do the show.
The 50/50 Club continued until 1984. 36 years of Ruth and Bob, and lots of memories to cherish.
I'll always, always be grateful to Bob Braun and even the people before him who made it all possible, because I was a part of something that just isn't happening anymore.
Still ahead on 50 Years on 5, a look at how news, weather, and sports have evolved into the visually dynamic productions they are today.
But about 10 years ago, I would guess, is when the emphasis really switched from local programming, entertainment programming, to a strong arm for news, weather, and sports.
Welcome back. As you just heard, it was in the 80s that viewers started demanding more news, weather, and sports, and the number of daily newscasts began to grow. All news networks also appeared as cable TV expanded. Here at WLWT News 5, we are doing more daily news than ever, but reporting important information has always been an important part of Channel 5's mission.
It's an industry that creates and recreates itself constantly. It's very dynamic. When I first started in television, we were doing a radio newscast on television.
When WLWT made the transition from radio to television, the technology was brand new. Round-the-clock newsmen like Bob Metzger did it all, shooting the pictures on film, writing the stories, and editing them for air. Resources were limited, and the video was not fancy. In fact, most evening newscasts were very short.
But the newscasts were only 15 minutes duration in the evening, and the network news at that time was only a 15-minute segment.
WLWT made the transition from film to videotape in 1977 and 1978. Tape is easier to edit and the equipment is lighter to carry, not to mention more cost-effective.
We felt very happy with film, and we felt very happy with the ability to do it because that was the state of the art at the time. You really ran deadlines because you had to put that film into the processor, let that film run for 40 minutes, and then take it out and physically hand cut and splice it.
As technology grew, so did our ability to bring viewers more information on big stories with live reports and larger news staffs to cover the events. Crews got a crash course in big news coverage when a string of 258 tornadoes hit the country on April 4th, 1974. Sailor Park and Xenia, Ohio were devastated.
Fortunately, nobody died, in our area here, but there was tremendous damage out there, and we had no experience, with tornadoes prior to that. At least I didn't, and people didn't realize at first when this big black cloud went across the western sky what was actually happening out there.
I was aware of the fact that it was going to be a bear cat, to use an old cliche, as far as weather is concerned, and I started at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was 2 o'clock the following morning that I was able to put it to bed. But it was really horrendous.
It didn't take long for the newsroom to develop team coverage for the big stories.
Good evening. The worst air disaster in Cincinnati's history happened tonight.
They put their plan into action a few years later during a deadly fire on board an Air Canada jet at the Greater Cincinnati Airport. It's one of the first examples of live team coverage as viewers watched the drama unfold.
The plane was 31,000 feet in the air when it caught fire. The pilot made a perfect landing.
They're moving them to a temporary morgue that they have set up in a nearby maintenance building.
Since then, live coverage of breaking news has become our mission as we keep you in touch with what's happening around you.
Local news is the very foundation upon which this television station is built. Local news is who we are in our community. We understand that people come to us for coverage of the events that impact their lives, and with that comes a great deal of responsibility. It's a responsibility that we take very seriously. Everyone in the television station has a role in our commitment to our local news programming. Local news will shape our future in this community.
Computer technology and new graphic systems have made news much more visual and much more interesting to watch. WLWT News 5 has a state-of-the-art fleet of live news-gathering truck and mobile satellite center to make sure you get all the information you need, no matter where the news breaks. We cover the stories that affect you the most right away, and we are giving you more chances each day to catch the news that affects you.
WLWT TV already airs more hours of local news programming than any other station in the marketplace, and our commitment to local news coverage has never been stronger.
Weather has always been an important part of television news. The first weather radar was used right here on News 5 and helped track storms into and out of the area. At first, radar was very basic, but now our cutting-edge equipment can show us weather into the future. Let's take a look at how it all evolved. From one guy, a teletype machine, and a 24-hour forecast, to a team of meteorologists, high-speed computers, and a forecast that looks ahead 5 days. The science of weather forecasting and broadcasting has certainly seen an evolution over the past 50 years. In the 1950s and 60s, weathermen, as they were known, used archaic equipment by today's standards. Poster boards and markers were the tools of the trade. It would take hours for the weatherman to draw a picture of just the current weather, but it worked and the message was simple and clear for at least the next few days. The 70s brought a change to the weather front with a personality approach rather than a scientific one. Those days, many of the weather presenters were not meteorologists, But former WLWT weatherman Tony Sands explains weather was still a very important part of each newscast.
Well, the weather was a very popular portion of the newscast, and at WLWT we were in a peculiar position in news presentation in that we had stations at WLWD in Dayton and WLWC in Cincinnati, in Columbus, and also in Indianapolis. So the weather was done for all 4 communities at one time, while the news was done separately for each station.
Now this is a picture of an infrared satellite, a brand new tool that we're using.
Computers played a major role in the transformation of the 80s, both on and off the air. As computers got faster, more programs were written, and forecasts started reaching out. 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, a month, 3 months. On the air, sun and cloud magnets were replaced with colorful computer displays, along with moving satellites and radar pictures.
The use of radar and satellites, there are things that were being done, but not visually. So it's an electronic presentation of the data that we were presenting with Chalk Talk years ago.
As computers continued to advance in the 90s, so did what we could do. We still look at satellites, but instead of seeing clouds move in the past, we can now show them moving in the future. Instead of just looking at radar and seeing a broad area of rain, we can zoom to the rain to show you exactly where it's raining and how hard. We can also pinpoint which areas might be threatening with severe weather and if you are in the storm's path. Instead of hearing thunder and waiting for the lightning to strike, we can show you where the lightning is as it strikes and whether those deadly bolts will head your way. From Tony Sands and the weather to WLWT Storm Center 5 and the Storm Team, the revolution has been significant. We now sit with the most sophisticated equipment and technology ready to attack whatever Mother Nature doles out. We're able to show you tomorrow's weather today and ready for the next 50 years.
Front Stadium. 2-1 pitch from Shaw into left center. There it is. Rose has eclipsed Cobb. That's number 4,192.
Scenes like these have become familiar on Channel 5. WLWT has a rich history in sports. In fact, the first sporting event televised on W8XCT was a doubleheader between the Cincinnati Reds and the Philadelphia Phillies, broadcast by Red Thornburg. Over the early years, W8XCT and WLWT broadcast a wide variety of sporting events, including wrestling, college and professional basketball, and football. Local basketball star Oscar Robertson was seen in the homes of Cincinnatians throughout his college and professional career. Another sport often televised was boxing.
Television was in a sense a rarity, and then it became a good tool to use to assemble people to get together for special events, especially for fights.
One of those early fights featured Ezzard Charles, an excellent young boxer from Cincinnati, in a light heavyweight bout against Joey Maxim at Cincinnati Gardens. Charles would later become the light heavyweight champion of the world. But perhaps WLWT was best known for coverage of the Cincinnati Reds. In 1948, there were 32 commercial telecasts of the Cincinnati Reds home games. Over the next 47 years, there were several unforgettable moments that took place on WLWT, including the 1975 World Championship. Pete Rose's hit to beat Ty Cobb's record, and the 1990 World Championship.
The champions of baseball.
Channel 5 continued to own the Reds television rights until 1995, when it was no longer economically feasible to carry them. We'll never forget the memories. Today, WLWT News 5 Sports takes you live to the events that matter to you, like Kentucky's big win in the NCAA tournament. We also cover the Reds and the Bengals away and at home. In addition, we have the most in-depth coverage in the greater Cincinnati area of high school sports, with our high school blitz and the basketball blitz. Coming up next, find out why we were called Colortown, USA, when we take a look at our Channel 5 firsts.
television only goes back to about 1948 when this company, which is Channel 5, celebrating the 50th anniversary, they pioneered in Cincinnati. They were W8XCT. And the studios were very warm. The studio was a hotel room, is what it was, at the Crew Tower. And they broadcast from the top part of the Crew Tower in downtown Cincinnati, which served as an antenna for them so they could get their signal out farther.
WLWT's television history is filled with a number of firsts, both nationally and within the greater Cincinnati area.
For a couple of years, it was purely experimental, and there was just a lot of effort to try to see what we could put on the screen.
On June 4th, 1946, a station named W8XCT, which would later become WLWT, broadcast its first television pictures. For the next 9 months, W8XCT experimented with a number of different images, including live pictures in June 1946, the first motion picture telecast in January 1947, and then the first night telecast on April 7th, 1947. It wasn't until the end of July 1947 that the trial station began a regular air schedule, 1 hour per week.
Television, as I recall, and I was one of the early participants, was only on the air in the late evenings, like 6 o'clock until 11 p.m. at night. And there was some question as to whether or not television would ever make it during daytime, because a lot of the pundits were saying, oh no, the housewives will never stop doing what they're doing in order to watch television.
But the popularity of television continued to grow, and in February 1948, WLWT became Cincinnati's first commercial television station. 2 months later, the station signed the first NBC affiliate contract in the country.
NBC Television.
And then in the middle of the summer of 1951, WLWT was recognized nationally when it originated Midwestern Hayride and Straw Hat Matinee for NBC TV.
Hi again. Welcome to the second section of Straw Hat Matinee with yours truly,
Rosemary and Mel.
This paved the road for future shows such as the Ruth Lyons 50/50 Club to be fed to the network. In 1954, WLWT became NBC's first color affiliate with the telecast of the Tournament of Roses parade. But Ruth Lyons would not be outdone by the network.
You know that because of Ruth Lyons, this was Colortown, USA? She talked about it so much that her show is going to go in color. And you got to get a color set, girls, so you can watch me, she'd say.
This Friday, we give the RCA color set.
And so they all went out and bought one, and there were more color TV sets per population in Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, and Indianapolis than anywhere in America.
On August 9th, 1957, the 50/50 Club, hosted by Ruth Lyons, became the first local color entertainment program. But WLWT didn't stop there. In November of 1959, a game by Cincinnati's professional basketball team, the Cincinnati Royals, was the first to be fed to NBC in color. Following suit, the Cincinnati Reds aired its first color game on May 16, 1960. All of these events contributed to Channel 5 becoming known as Colortown, USA, and the colorful station. All of this is part of the rich tradition that made WLWT such a success. From the past, we now look ahead to the future. We'll show you where WLWT and News 5 are headed in the next 50 years.
Welcome back to WLWT 50 Years on 5. We've spent a lot of time tonight talking about the past 50 years at WLWT. Now it's time to look ahead at what our future has in store for you, our viewers.
On February 9th at 1:44 p.m., we made television history once again when WLWT DT35 signed on the air as Greater Cincinnati and the Tri-State's first digital television broadcaster. This exciting new technology will let you see us like never before.
Television is the most dynamic medium in the world because it combines sight, sound, motion, and emotion. Digital television takes those qualities to the next level. It improves the sight and sound, which will have a definite impact on the emotion.
The shape of the TV is the first thing you notice that's different, because I mean today TV sets are pretty much square, and with the new digital transmission system and new digital TV, they have a 16:9 aspect ratio, which means they're a lot wider than they are tall, kind of like a movie screen. And so that's the first thing you see right away is, ooh, that's a funny shaped television set. The other thing is the uncommon clarity. I mean, it's like watching a movie in your home. The colors are brilliant, the clarity is wonderful, and you've got theater sound in your house.
Ironically, no one can see our digital picture just yet, but that will change before the year ends.
The television manufacturers have said that they are going to start having television sets available this fall for people to buy. And you'll find them first at the higher end video stores, which more normally carry the more expensive stuff. And then we'll start seeing in 1999 them rolling out to a broader base of dealers.
As with most new technologies, digital televisions will be expensive at first. Like everything, that will change with time.
When the first TV sets come out, we're talking about TV sets that are in the $5,000 to $8,000 range for a large screen television, which is a big chunk of change for anybody to put out. The nice thing about that, however, is the way technology works. I mean, if you can remember, in 1979, your pocket calculator cost $400, and now you can pick them up at the drugstore for $9.99. The same thing with VCRs. When VCRs first came out, I can recall friends of mine going to the video store and buying VCRs for $1,200. And now I can go down the street and pick one up for $150 or $200, which do more than the $1,200 ones did 15 years ago. So I don't think that we're going to be in a position where the TV sets are going to stay expensive for a very long time.
But what if you don't want to or can't afford to buy a new digital television set? Well, there will be another option for you.
In addition to the fact that technology is going to decrease in price over time, there is always the set-top box option. It has always been an option. If you recall, when cable first came into cities, and you had a funny little TV set with a rotary tuner, and you couldn't get cable directly into your TV set, so the cable manufacturers provided you with a box to sit on top of your TV set that would decode the cable channels into your existing TV set. And that's going to be true of digital television too. No one will ever not be able to see television. You'll be able to go out and buy a less expensive box, which you can put on your current television set, which will be able to receive the digital signals off of the digital transmitter and convert them down into your own TV set.
And if you're worried that someday you may not be able to watch television as you know it today, you can put your mind to rest.
I think that a lot of people are worried that someday we're just going to go pull that switch in the sky, and one day very soon the entire world will be digital television and no more analog television will exist. And how are people going to see digital television if they're not ready to in their home? And the answer is the FCC has seen to that, in that they have mandated that everybody will run analog TV until at least 2006, or until a significant portion of your viewing population has new digital TV sets or set-top boxes or something. So you're never going to be without a television picture. You're never going to not be able to receive us. It's just that as people purchase new TV sets, they'll be able to see the digital signal.
As exciting as the new digital television technology is, even more exciting is the focus and direction that WLWT is taking to bring Greater Cincinnati and the Tri-State the very best local television.
The most exciting thing going on in broadcast today is a commitment to local television. It's a commitment to pioneering state-of-the-art technology, for example in weather, where we use the most powerful state-of-the-art equipment to protect people's lives. It's about a commitment to local news coverage. It's about a commitment to advancing digital technology, technology that will improve the picture that people see in their home. Ultimately, our commitment and the commitment of Hearst Argyle Television will provide viewers with a better product. And that's the bottom line, giving the viewers a better product.
Without a doubt, there is a bright future ahead for WLWT, but it's a future with big challenges for all television stations.
I think the biggest question is, where's all the programming going to come from? We're very fortunate at WLWT TV because we have a strong commitment to local news programming, and we're associated with the top network in the country. And NBC has a wonderful tradition of program development. But look around at the other choices. Many of them are just reruns of what you've seen on regular network television.
Where will we be 50 years from now? All of us at WLWT have the same goal in mind, and that's to be part of your lives each and every day.
I have many wishes for the television station and the people of this television station. But if I had to impact their lives, when they think of local news coverage, when they think of entertainment, when they think of community service, they think of us first. When we have done that, and they're thinking of us first, we will have done our jobs because we will have fulfilled their needs.
In early 1999, WLWT opens another chapter in history as we leave Crosley Square and move into a brand new facility in Mount Auburn. Coming up next, a final look at the highlights of 50 years of historic broadcasting. And 50 Years on 5 continues.
For the past 2 hours, we've shown you 50 years of WLWT Channel 5 and how it has made the station and television what it is today.
We've also shown you where Channel 5 and the TV industry are headed in the future. We thank you for watching and letting us share our story with you.
We end with a look at the people and programs that have shaped WLWT for 50 years on 5. Good night.
WLW Radio and WLW Color Television cordially welcomes you to Ruth Lyon's fabulous 50-50 Club.
Well, it's time for the 50-50 Club. Yes, time to relax, sing a song, and have some fun. Forget for a while your troubles. We'll try to turn them all into bubbles. It's great to meet you.
It's charming to greet you
For the Monday session of the 50-50 Club.
And now here she is, the star of the show, the fabulous Ruth Lyon.
I just thought being March the 1st, by golly, we'd have spring if it killed us. And it nearly did. Do you know how much those cost? Don't help me down the steps, Willie. I have to keep telling you that all the time. I don't need to be helped down the steps.
Don't want you to fall.
Oh, fiddly-dee, you don't do that. You do that because I look like I need help. Yes, you do, too. Now, don't help me down, especially not for the elbow.
How do you want?
That's the way my father helped my grandmother down. I can just feel
Well, that's the gentlemanly way to do it, you know.
the old-fashioned way, too, and it makes me feel like an antique every time you do it.
But if you would like to dig the world's #1 square dancers, here they are, the Midwesterners.
Hello, Dayton, hello, Columbus, and Indianapolis, too. It's the Dixon Show, where things are really happening. It's fun and entertainment, it's sure to keep you laughing.
Well, good morning. It's the day of the wedding, folks, and here he is, the one and only Paul Bailey.
You're crazier than I am. Do you want to? Whoa! What a mob of people we got here this morning. We've got the overflow down Studio B downstairs. Everybody is here for the big wedding.
Everyone is most excited, and I think it is the mayor of Neesville.
Sir, could you talk to us for just a moment before you go in?
Rosie, I'd like to talk to you.
The vast television audience would like to hear a few words.
Well, Rosie, I'd like to talk to you, sweetheart.
I'd
I'd love to talk to you, honey, but I've got a big thing going here. Now, I'll see you all later. You hang right in there.
Won't you please talk to us for just a moment?
I presume you all think I know what I'm going to do now. You are all crazy. I don't know what I'm going to do now. But it's good to be here on this morning. We've waited a long, long time for this, and I think really... Are you ready to go, girls? Shall we get this thing started? Will you love her, comfort her, keep her in sickness and in health, and promise not to ruffle her feathers as long as you both shall live? For as much as Harry the Rooster and Pauline the Hen have consented together in chicken-type wedlock and have placed their faith in the Kroger Company to support them, I, as mayor of Neesville, now pronounce they are husband and wife. Now, Harry, you may peck your bride. Pauline, you may peck him back. That's getting sickening. Both of you stand up. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the wedding has been concluded, and Pauline and Harry will now leave arm in arm with Roger Neiser and Marty and the wedding party. Slower. We got plenty of time. Slower, you idiot.
You have to be tired. That's the only thing I can say.
I am not tired, and that's a hell of a way to start the program.
Well,
I am not tired.
You don't look tired.
I am not tired, and I just have been over to Izzy's, and I may never come down. Izzy puts you in orbit.
Is that a place to have breakfast?
Anything, any meal. Go to Izzy's and just, you're awake for the rest of the month. And he gave me a shamrock with a Star of David on it, so I'm covered. I'm really covered.
You're ready. You're ready.
Fresh-like vacuum-cooked canned peas are different 3 ways, better 3 ways. You can hear the difference, you can see the difference, you can taste the difference. Here's a can of ordinary peas. They're cooked in water and canned in water. Listen. They even sound watery. Now here's a can of Fresh-like peas. It sounds solid because it is solid-packed with tender peas, vacuum-cooked in their own tasty juices. Now, watch this. Look at all the liquid in that ordinary can of peas. Here's what Fresh-like vacuum-cooked solid-pack means. Less liquid and more vacuum-cooked Fresh-like peas. Now, here's the treat. Just butter hot Fresh-like peas and serve. They're vacuum-cooked, vacuum-packed to protect vitamins, minerals, and fresh flavors. Ah, they do taste Fresh-like. Hear the difference, see the difference, taste the difference.
NBC Television.